Good morning, students. We were doing this story, The Sound Machine, and we have done till page 104. So we have to start today from page 105 of your book. Please open to page 105 of your book, Echoes. Right. So till now we know that this person, that is Klausner, he took his machine to the garden to test his machine. Right. So what happened next? We will know today when we read the chapter further. And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense listening attitude. So he was bending over the machine and he tried to listen. He was like a bit tense, you can say a bit anxious. Why? Because he was trying his level best to test the machine. Earlier there were some problems with the machine and then he tried to rectify those flaws in the machine, and so he came to the garden after correcting those flaws which were there, or correcting those faults which were there in the machine. And so he just cocked his head to one side, means he raised his head to one side, and then he tried to listen to some sound which was there, which he could hear. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob, and then with his right hand he started turning the knob very slowly. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial, and as he was moving that knob, what happened? The needle which was there, which was present on the dial, it also started moving. So slowly he could hardly see it move. So the needle was moving so slowly. It was turning the knob also very slowly, and so it was very difficult for him to notice the movement of the needle in the dial. And in the earphones, he could hear a faint spasmodic crackling. And what happened? Through his earphones, because he had put on his earphones, and he could hear very faint spasmodic. Spasmodic means uh, at happening at intervals, right? At sharp intervals, right? So that is spasmodic. Crackling means sharp sounds, you can say. So very sharp sounds he was able to hear at regular intervals. So behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself. And then the other sound which you will see, besides this crackling sound, besides these sharp sounds which he could hear, he also heard some humming tone, right? And that humming tone was the noise of the machine. That noise was made by the machine itself. But that was all. So these were the two sounds which he could hear. One was the noise of the machine, and one was the sound which was produced when he moved that knob. So that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head. So as he was moving the knob further, he had a very strange kind of a feeling. He felt something very strange. And what was that feeling? He had a feeling, he had a sensation that his ears are moving away from his head, stretching out away from his head. That each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire, like a tentacle, right? So tentacles are like, they are the, you can say the body parts of some animals, right? Like the octopus. Octopus has tentacles, and other creatures also, they have tentacles. So they are the thin parts of the animals. So he felt that his ears are now getting separated from his head, and they are not fixed to his head, and they are like connected to through some wires. They are connected to his head by the means of some wires. This was the sensation which he felt, that the ears were going up and up towards a secret and a forbidden territory. Forbidden territory means restricted area, right? So he had a feeling that his ears, they are moving upward and upward, and they are moving towards some restricted territory or restricted area where they are not supposed to go, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right. So that region, that ultrasonic region, where human ears, their entry is forbidden. You know that human ear can hear sounds only up to a certain frequency, right? That is the permissible limit for a human ear is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Sounds below 20 hertz, they cannot be heard by a human ear, and above 20,000 hertz, they also cannot be heard by humans, right? So he felt that his ears are trying to move into some restricted territory or some forbidden area. A dangerous, and that region was a dangerous ultrasonic. What is ultrasonic? That is when the pitch is higher than the human ear can hear. That is ultrasonic region, having a very high pitch, like having a pitch which is higher than the human limit. The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek. And that little needle which was there in that dial, it was very slowly, it was moving because he was going on twisting the knob, turning the knob. So that little needle which was present there, in the dial, that was also moving. And then what happened? All of a sudden, he heard a shriek, right? Frightful, piercing shriek. So shriek was a very frightful and a very piercing shriek. And he jumped and dropped his head, catching hold of the edge of the table. And it was so sharp, so frightening that he almost jumped and his hands they dropped. Means he was shocked when he heard that shriek. And he clenched the edge of the table. He held the edge of the table very tightly. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. Then he started looking here and there, trying to figure out the place, trying to figure out the source of that shriek, as if trying to find out the person who has who was responsible for shrieking. There was no one in sight except the woman in the garden next door. So there was no one to be seen. The only person who was visible was the woman which was in the other garden. Next door. And it was certainly not she. And he was confident that she was not made by her. She was certainly not the person who is to be held responsible for that she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. So what was this lady doing in the other garden, in the next door garden? She was chopping the roses, the yellow roses, and she was collecting them in her basket. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek. And then he heard that same sound again. Once more he heard that sound. That sound was a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cool. So this is how he has described. Means that shriek appeared to be, you can say, inanimate. Right? He felt that no human can produce such a shriek, right? It was not someone. It was not. It was not the kind of a shriek which can be done by some human. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality. So that shriek had a metallic quality, means that inhuman quality the shriek had, and he had never heard it before. And he had never in his life heard a similar shriek in the past. Klausner looked around him, searching instinctively. Instinctively means because of his instinct. So, see, we all of us have instincts, right? So, he, based on the basis of, based on his instincts, he started looking here and there, trying to figure out from where the sound has come, source of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing in sight. And what he could find was there was no one around, no one to be seen except the woman who was cutting those flowers in the next door garden. he saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the finger of his hand, and snip the stem. Snip the stem means cut the stem. So he saw, when he looked at the woman, and what did he see? He saw that the woman he took the rose stem in his fingers, and then with the other hand, she snipped the stem with a pair of scissors. She cut the stem with a pair of scissors. And the moment this act was done by the woman, right? The moment she cut, or she just snipped the stem with the scissors, again he heard the scream. At that exact moment, he again heard the similar screaming sound. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. At this point, the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses, and turned to walk away. So the woman's job was done. She had cut enough roses, and so she just kept the scissors in her basket and turned to go inside the house. So now Klausner was able to find out the source of the sound. Why? Because the sound came at the exact moment when the rose was chopped off, when the rose was cut from the stem. So what did Klausner do? He shouted, "Mrs. Saunders!" Klausner shouted, his voice shrill with excitement. So his voice was shrill. He was very excited because now he was able to detect the source of the sound, and his machine was also functioning properly, right? So there was a lot of excitement inside him, and so he shouted, "Mrs. Saunders!" His voice shrill with excitement. "Oh, Mrs. Saunders!" And looking around, the women saw her neighbor standing on a fantastic arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. So he was, see, it was very difficult for Klausner to control his excitement. He was so excited. He had been working on that machine for a long period of time. And now he could hear some strange sounds which were not really produced by humans, right? So he could hear those ultrasonic sounds, which were like, now he started believing the sound was produced by that plant, by that rose plant, which were when the roses were cut. So he was very excited about it, and so he couldn't control his excitement, and he started waving his arm like this, "Mrs. Saunders, Mrs. Saunders, oh, Mrs. Saunders," right? And so now Mrs. Saunders was completely oblivious of what was going on, right, at Klausner's place, or what was Klausner doing. So she was like kind of alarmed. She was surprised that why this next door neighbor of mine started shouting all at once, right? Why? Because his his voice was very loud, louder than normal. So she was like kind of alarmed and shocked that what's wrong with him, right? Why is he shouting? "Cut another one, please cut another one quickly." So what did he say? He asked Mrs. Saunders to cut another rose. "Please, Mrs. Saunders, please cut one more rose." She stood still, staring at him. "Why, Mr. Klausner?" she said. "What's the matter?" Now see, a person is very peacefully cutting down the roses from the trees in her own garden, and all of a sudden a neighbor starts screaming and says that, please cut one more rose, please. So obviously the person will not be able to understand anything. The same was the situation of Mrs. Saunders, right? And a person who doesn't enjoy the reputation of being normal, right? As it is, we know from the very beginning from the behavior of Klausner that he is a kind of an abnormal person, right? So he said, "Please cut one more room." So she was staring at him, and then she said, "Why, Mr. Klausner? What's the matter? Why do you want me to cut another room?" Please do as I asked," he said. "Cut just one more row." So he again sounded, please cut one more row." He started pleading, requesting Mrs. Saunders, "Please do as I say, please just cut one more row." So Mrs. Saunders had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. So Mrs. Saunders was aware of the fact that this neighbor of hers is kind of peculiar, kind of weird, a strange person. Now it seemed that he has gone completely crazy. And now she started believing that this neighbor has gone completely mad, right? He's totally out of his senses now. She wondered whether she should run into the house and fetch her husband. Now, another thought which started coming into her head was that should she go inside the house and bring her husband, right? Because whatever request was made by Klausner was really a strange one, right? No, she thought. Then on the second thought, she felt that no, it's okay. No, he's just harmless. He's just a crazy person, but he is harmless. It's just, I'll just honor him. Then she decided, okay, fine, what's the harm if he's asking me to just cut down one more rose? It's not a big deal. Like, I will grant this favor, right? And so I'll just humor him. I will just humor him means I will just do whatever, humor somebody means to just do whatever the person is asking you to do, right? So that they are not annoyed or they are not upset, right? Just when you do something just to please the person, right? When you do something what the other person wants just to please him so that the person is not upset or annoyed, so that is known as humor. Certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like, she said. So she said, sure, Mr. Klausner, certainly I will cut another rose for you if you want me to do it. She took her scissors from the basket, bent down and snipped another. And then Mrs. Saunders, she just bent, took scissors from her basket and snipped another. Again, Klausner heard that frightful throat-test shriek in the ear. So again, a similar sound was heard by Klaus. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. And this sound was also heard exactly at the same moment when the rose was cut from its stem. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the gardens. And then he just took off the earphones from his head and ran towards the fence. Fence means the boundary which separated the two houses, right? And he ran to that fence. And then what did he say? All right, he said, that's enough. No more, please, no more. So then he said, all right, Mrs. Saunders, that's enough. Thank you, Mrs. Saunders. And enough. Now, please don't cut any more roses. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in her hand. And Mrs. Saunders was standing there with a yellow rose in her hand. Clippers means the scissors, with the garden scissors which she had. Those were in the other hand. And she was like looking at him, that what's wrong with this person, right? So, I'm going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders, he said. Something that you won't believe. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered. Peered means when you look at someone with a lot of concentration. So he was so excited. He wanted to share this new discovery, the new thing which he has discovered. He has found out that trees also, the plants also make some sound when they are harmed or when they are injured, right? So he wanted to share this with someone. So the only human which was present with Klausner at that moment was Mrs. Saunders. So he said that, Mrs. Saunders, I want to tell you something and I'm sure you won't believe it, whatever I am going to tell you. He put his hand on the top of the fence. So he just rested his hand on the top of the fence and peered. Peered means and looked at her with a lot of concentration, intently through his thick spectacles. Intently means with a lot of, you can say, eagerness, with a lot of earnestness, right? Very earnestly he looked at him, looked at her through his bespectacle eyes, right? Through his spectacles, which he was wearing. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have with a sharp pair of scissors cut through the stems of living. Mrs. Saunders, this evening you have cut a basket full of roses, Mrs. Saunders, and you used these sharp pair of scissors, right? And you have cut the living things. And each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. And Mrs. Saunders, I have to tell you that each and every rose which was cut by you, it produced a very terrible shriek. It was screaming. The moment it was cut, it screamed. It uttered a very terrible cry. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders? Were you aware of this fact, Mrs. Saunders? Mrs. Saunders was in utter shock. She said, no, I certainly didn't know that. So she said, no, I certainly didn't have any idea about it. He said, then Klausner said, it happens to be true, Mrs. Saunders. It happens to be true. he was breathing rather rapidly, and he was like, because of his excitement, he was breathing very fast. It happens to be true, but he was trying to control his excitement, and he was trying his level best to control this excitement. I heard them shrieking. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain. And every time you chopped off one rose from the plant, I was able to hear the cry of that rose in pain. A very high pitched sound. It was a very high pitched sound. Means it was an ultrasonic sound. Approximately 132,000 vibrations per second. So this was the frequency of the sound. It made the frequency of the sound was 132,000 vibrations a second, which is um, way beyond the capacity of the human ear. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. Mrs. Saunders, I know you would have not been able to hear that sound, but I heard it. It was like not possible for you to hear that sound, Mrs. Saunders, but I heard it. So she is now again not able to believe what this person is saying, right? It even confirmed the opinion which Mrs. Saunders had about this person, that this person is crazy, this person is out of his mind. Did you really, Mr. Klausner? She decided she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds. So now, because he was not making sense to her, so she decided that the next thing which she is supposed to do is make a dash. Make a dash means to run very quickly from a place, because you find yourself to be in a dangerous situation and you want to escape a particular situation or a particular person. So then you make a dash. That means you run very quickly from that place, right, to escape. So she decided that she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds, and then she decided that within 5-6 seconds I'm going to run away from this place. I'm not going to stay at this place any longer. This was her decision. So he went on, but this Klausner, he was so excited and he wanted to discuss his discovery with someone. So he didn't realize that he's being considered as a person who is out of his senses. So he went on. He said, "You might say that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You'd be right. It hasn't. I know, Mrs. Saunders, what will you think, that a rose bush doesn't have a nervous system, and without the nervous system, how can anyone feel, right? A rose bush doesn't have a throat also. So how can a rose bush cry? I know you will say these things, right? And you are right also. A rose bush doesn't have these things. But now, like ours, anyway. So now let me tell you that yes, you are right. It hasn't. It doesn't have a nervous system. It doesn't have a throat to cry, right? But I would say that it doesn't have all these things like ours. But it definitely has something which is very different from our nervous system and from our throat. But how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? And here he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce, how do you know? So then when he said, no, when he was saying this, he leaned over the fence and then he started talking very slowly. He said, but how do you know? How can you be so sure of it, Mrs. Saunders? How do you know? And then he started whispering and he said, how do you know that rose bush doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem into two? So how can you be so sure that rose bush doesn't feel the pain when somebody cuts it in two, as you would feel if someone cut your wrist off with a garden shears? Garden shears means the garden scissors. It's a tool like which is resembles a scissor, right? Which is used in the garden. How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it? So how can you say that a tree doesn't feel the pain? You know that it is something which is alive, isn't it? Will you believe me or not that it is alive? It definitely is alive. A tree is a living being. So how can you be so sure that it doesn't feel the pain? Yes, Mr. Klausner. Oh, yes, and good night. So, Mr. Saunders, like he just said, yes, Mr. Klausner, yes, you are right. And then she said good night, and she turned and ran up the garden to her house. And then she said, yes, Mr. Klausner, yes, Oh, yes, you're right. And then she wished him good night, and she just dashed into her house. Klausner went back to the table. Klausner went back to the table where his machine and everything was kept. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine. He again went back to the machine and he tried to hear some more sound. So he could hear only two sounds, the sounds which were produced by the machine earlier also, that is the humming sound of the machine and the sharp crackling sound. Sorry, the faint crackling sound, but nothing more. He bent down and took hold of the small white daisy growing on the lawn. He took it between thumb and forefingers and slowly pulled it upward and sideways until the stem. So then, what did he do? He went to a daisy plant. It was growing on the lawn, and then he took it between his thumb and the forefinger. He just held it like this between the thumb and the forefinger, and slowly he pulled it upward till the stem was until the stem broke. From the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem heard, he distinctly heard in the earphone a faint, high-pitched cry, curiously inanimate. Inanimate means lifeless, something which is not alive. So from the moment he started pulling it, right, till the time the stem broke, till the time that daisy was pulled out from the plant, he could very distinctly, very clearly, he could hear through his earphones a faint, high-pitched cry. And that cry was a lifeless one, right? Means which was a very metallic cry. It was not something which was produced by a human being. He took another daisy and did it again. And so he again repeated the same thing with another daisy. Then he just took hold of another daisy also between his thumb and forefinger, and then once more he heard the cry. So when he did it, he again heard a similar cry. But he wasn't so sure now that it expressed pain. But because the sound was heard by him for the first time in his life, he has never in the past heard a similar sound. So he was not sure that whether the cry, whether the shriek which he heard was a painful one or not. Because as it is, he has told earlier that it was a very inhuman and an inanimate one, right? Just like a very lifeless shriek. So he cannot be very sure that whether that shriek expressed pain or not. No, it wasn't pain. It was surprise. So then he realized, when he analyzed further, he came to know that no, it wasn't pain. It was surprise. Or was it? So he was kind of skeptical about it. He was not very sure about it, that whether it was a painful one or whether it was just a cry of surprise. It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to human beings. It was just a cry, a neutral, stony cry, a single, emotionless. Stony cry means without feelings, right? So stony means without feelings. So then he realized, when he analyzed it further, he realized that no, it was just a cry. It was like it didn't express any of the human feelings. It didn't express any of the feelings which were known to human beings, right? It was just a very feelingless and very neutral, very emotionless no, and it expressed nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He heard a similar cry with the roses also. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably didn't feel pain. And so he realized that he was very incorrect in terming that cry as a cry of pain, because maybe the flower didn't feel the pain. It felt something else which he didn't know. Something called as toin or spul or polinecment or anything you call it. So he said it was like something different, something which can be called by any other name. See, there is no meaning of these words like toin, spurl, and palinquement. Linacment. Why? Because these are the words which he doesn't know, right? So he said you can call it by any strange name, toin or spurl or linacment or anything of the sort you can call him. Why? Because these words don't have any meaning, and he was not able to understand the meaning of the sound also. So that is why he has used such strange names, right? Because he wanted to express that he doesn't know what it means. He stood up and removed the earphones. So then he got up, removed the earphones. It was getting dark, and he could see pricks of light shining in the windows of the houses all around. So he could see the lights being switched on in the neighborhood, and so he decided to move in. Carefully, he picked up the black box from the table, carried it into the shed, and put it on the workbench. Then he went out, locked the door behind him, and walked up to the house. So he was done for the day. He took the machine and locked it in the shed, kept it on the workbench, and then locked the door and went inside his house. The next morning, Klausner was up as soon as it was light. Right? Why? Because he now wanted to test his machine further. So he got up very early the next morning. The moment the sun rose, he was up. He dressed and went straight to the shed. And then he dressed himself, and straight away he went to the shed where the machine was kept. He picked up the machine and carried it outside. And then he lifted the machine and moved outside the house, clasping it to his chest with both hands, walking unsteadily. Unsteadily means in a very wobbly manner, right? Very shaky. His walk was very shaky. You know that taking into consideration his personality, he was a very lean, thin man and a very small man, and the weight of the machine, right? He was not able to walk with the machine properly. So that is why he was walking in a very unsteadily, in a wobbly manner under its weight. He went past the house, out through the front gate, and across the road to a park. And so where did he go in the early morning? He went to the park. There he paused and looked around him. Then he went on until he came to a large tree. Then he just stopped inside the park. When he entered the park, he stopped there and looked here and there. And then he went to a large tree, a beech tree. And the tree was a beech tree. And he placed the machine on the ground, close to the trunk of the tree. Then near the trunk of the tree, he placed the machine very close to the trunk of the tree. Quickly, he went back to the house and got an axe from the wholesaler. Wholesaler means a cellar means a place. It's like a storehouse, right? Where you store things, where you keep things, right? So it's normally a cellar is normally an underground room, right? Which is used for storing things. And coal cellar means a room which is used for storing coal. So he went back to the house and fetched his axe and carried it across the road into the park. And then he carried that axe across the road into the park. He brought an axe on. He put the axe on the ground beside the tree. So he kept the machine and the axe both near the tree. Then he looked around him again, peering nervously through his thick glasses in every direction. And then he looked here and there, right, around him, looking very attentively through his, looking with a lot of concentration, looking very carefully through his thick glasses in every direction he looked. There was no one about. It was 6 in the morning. And there was no one to be found. Why? Because it was 6 o'clock in the morning. He put the earphones on his head and switched on the machine. Then he put the earphones on his head and he switched on the machine. He listened for a moment to the faint, familiar humming sound. And then for a moment he heard the faint, familiar humming sound, the humming sound which was produced by the machine. Then he picked up the axe, took a stance. Took a stance means took a position, right? He lifted the axe up and took a position with his legs wide apart and swung the axe as hard as he could at the base of the tree trunk. So what did he do? He lifted the axe, took a position, and he swung the axe as hard as he could, and he struck the trunk of the tree with his axe. The blade cut deep into the wood and stuck this is what happens. You need to pull out the blade whenever you hit a tree with a sharp object, right? Say an axe. What happens? The axe is fixed there. Then you will have to twist it a little and put in some effort to pull it out from there. So the wood and stuck there. So the blade of the axe was stuck there, deep into the wood. And at the instant of the impact, he heard the most extraordinary noise in his. And at that very moment, when the axe hit the tree, he heard a very extraordinary sound. The sound which was not heard by him in the past. It was a new noise. It was a very different noise. It was different from the sounds which he heard a day before, right? A growling, low-pitched, screaming sound, not quick and short like the noise of the roses, but drawn out like a saw. So it was a drawn out. It was a stretched sound like a saw, lasting for fully 1 minute. Loudest at the moment when the axe struck, fading gradually fainter and fainter until it was gone. So the sound, the volume of the sound was the maximum when the axe hit the tree, and then it faded. Gradually, it became lesser and lesser, and then it finally died out. Klausner stared in horror at the place where the blade of the axe had sunk into the wood flesh of the tree. So Klausner, because it was such a terrible sound, right, and it was a very long sound, we heard it for a entire 1 minute. So Klausner just looked. He kept on staring with a lot of horror, right? With a lot of, you can say, he was so, you can say he was so terrified. And when he looked at the blade, at the place where the blade of the axe had sunk into the wood flesh of the tree. So he looked, he was just staring at that cut which was made by the blade of the axe into that. Then gently he took the axe handle. Then very gently he took the axe handle. Worked the blade loose. Worked the blade loose means he twisted the handle a bit so that the blade is able to move out of that cut, and threw the thing on the ground. And then he threw the thing. Thing is the axe. Then he threw that axe on the ground. With his fingers, he touched the gash. Gash means the deep cut, right? So the deep cut which was made by the axe on the tree trunk, he touched that cut with his hand that the axe had made into the wood, touching the edges of the gash. So he started touching the edges of the gash, trying to press them together to close the wound. And so, and what did he do? He tried to press, tried to bring both the ends together to close the wound. And he kept saying, "Tree, oh tree, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but it will heal, fine." So then he was repeating this again and again. "Tree, I'm so sorry, I made this wound, I injured you, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. It will heal, it will be fine," right? And he was somehow trying to close that wound. You can say that close that gash which was created by the axe. For a while he stood there with his hands upon the trunk of the great tree. Then suddenly he turned away and hurried off out of the park, across the road, to the front gate and back. So for a while he was standing there in shock, and his hands were upon the trunk of the tree. And then after some time he rushed back from the park to his house. He went to the telephone, consulted the book. The book is the book where the numbers must be written. Dialed a number and waited. And then he dialed one number, and then he waited for the person at the other end to pick up the phone. He held the receiver tightly in his left hand and tapped the table impatiently. And then he was like holding the speaker tightly because he desperately wanted to talk to that person. Can you guess who the person was? The person will be Dr. Scott, right? So he held this receiver very tightly, and because he was so impatient, so anxious that he was tapping the table impatiently. He heard the telephone buzzing at the other end, and then the click of the lift and a man's voice, a sleepy voice. Who will get up in the early morning, right? So the doctor must be sleeping. So a sleepy voice, and then the receiver was picked and he heard a sleepy voice at the other end saying, "Hello." "Yes." "So, who is it?" "Hello." "Yes." "Dr. Scott," he said. So Rosner said, "Dr. Scott?" "Yes, speaking." "Dr. Scott, you must come at once, quickly, please." So the doctor thought that there is an emergency. So he said, "You must come quickly, right? I need you." "Who is it is speaking?" So the doctor wanted to know. He wanted to know who is the person who is calling him so early in the morning. "Klausner here. And you remember what I told you last night about my experience with sound and how I hoped it might?" So he said, "Doctor, you remember yesterday in the evening I told you about my experience, about my experiments with sound. I was like trying to find out something about sound and how I hoped I might, and then he was stopped." So this dash means that he was interrupted. So he was not able to complete his sentence. So the doctor said, "Yes, yes, of course, but what's the matter? Are you ill?" "So yes, yes, I know about your experiment with sound and what you were doing with sound. But just now, why have you called me so early in the morning? I want to know about it. Are you ill? Are you not okay?" "No, I'm not ill, but." So he said, "No, I'm not ill. There is nothing wrong with you, but." And then again, the doctor interrupted him. "It's 6:30 in the morning. It's just 6:30 in the morning." The doctor said, "And you call me, but you are not ill. And you are calling a doctor at 6:30 in the morning, and you are telling me that you are okay, you are fine, you are not ill. Please come. Come quickly. I want someone to hear it. It's driving me mad. I can't believe it." So Klausner said, please come to my place immediately. I want someone, I want to talk to someone. Right? Have to tell you something. Why? Because it's driving me mad. This whole thing, this whole experience is driving me mad. And I can't believe it. The doctor heard the frantic, almost hysterical note in the man's voice. Frantic means uh, uncontrolled emotions, right? When you're not able to control your emotion, then that is frantic. There was certain and hysterical. Hysterical again means very wild, uncontrolled emotion. So that hysterical and frantic sound which he heard, the hysterical and the frantic manner in which Klausner was talking, the same note he was used to hearing in the voice of the people who called up and said, "There has been an accident. Come to me." So the tone resembled the note of the people, the tone of the people who used to call him and would say that there is an accident, doctor, please come, please come. So his sound was exactly the same. His tone was exactly the same. "There has been an accident. Come quickly." So he said slowly, "You really want me to get out of the bed and come over now?" But there was no accident and Klausner was well. So the doctor again confirmed, "Are you sure you want me to come there at 6:30? Right? You want me to get out of the bed and be there with you at this time in the early morning?" "Yes, now, at once, please." So Klausner said, "Yes, yes, I want you to come here immediately." "All right, then, I'll come." So the doctor said, "Okay, fine, if you're so sure, then I'll come." Klausner sat down beside the telephone and waited. He tried to remember what the shriek of the tree had sounded like, but he couldn't. So he just sat next to the telephone and waited for the doctor to be there. And then in his mind, he tried to recollect the sound which was made by the tree, that shriek which was made by the tree, but was not able to do so. He couldn't remember, only that it had been enormous and frightful, and that it had made him sick with horror. The only thing which he remembered about the shriek was that it was a very terrible one, it was a very terrifying one, and it was a huge, big shriek, right? And it had horrified him, right? It had made him feel sick with horror. He tried to imagine what sort of noise a human would make if he had to stand anchored to the ground while someone deliberately swung a small sharp thing at his neck so that the blade cut in deep and wedged itself in the cut. So now he started imagining a human being in place of a tree. If a human being is anchored, means if the human being is fixed to the ground, and then he is attacked with a sharp object, right? And upon his leg, and the blade of that sharp object makes a deep and wedge means like to force something in a very small space, right? So if the sharp object wedges itself in the cut, how will that human being feel? Same sort of noise. Maybe the sound which I heard, the noise which I heard was a similar kind of no, quite different. So he was just reflecting and thinking about the sound which he heard, the sound which was produced by the tree. The noise of the tree was worse than any known human noise because of the frightening, toneless, throatless one. Then he realized that no, the sound which was produced by the tree, the sound which he heard, was worse and more frightening than any human noise, right? Because it was toneless, it was of throatless quality. He began to wonder about other living things, and he thought immediately of the field of wheat. A field of wheat standing up straight and yellow in a line. And the mower. Mower means a machine which is used for cutting grass, right? Mower is a machine which is, you must have seen the machine which is moved on the grass and the grass is chopped off. So he thought, then he started thinking about the different kinds of plants. He also thought about the field of wheat. There are so many wheat plants standing there, yellow in color, and they are all alive. And then what happens? A mower is moved through it, and then cutting the stems. 500 stems a second, every second, and 500 such plants are cut down every second. Oh my God, what would the noise be like? Then he realized how terrible that noise will be when 500 plants are just cut down in 1 second. What a terrible sound they must be producing. 500 wheat plants screaming together, and every second another 500 being cut and screaming. And no, he thought. Then he was scared, right? Then he started thinking about all these sounds which will be produced by the wheat tree, right? And how will a human being feel when he is hit by some sharp object? So all these thoughts which were coming to his head, right? He was like even more scared when he thought about all these things. No, he thought, I do not want to go to the wheat field with my machine. So then he realized that he said, no, I will never go to the wheat field with my machine. I would not never eat bread after that. Why? Because if I heard such a terrible sound, it will be produced by these wheat trees, 500 of them crying every second. So I will not be able to eat bread after that. And what about potatoes, cabbages, carrots, and onions? And what about apples? Oh no. So then he started thinking about different plants. Right? What all sounds they produce? He thought about potatoes, he thought about cabbages, and he thought about carrots and onions. What would happen to them? They would also cry when they are plucked out. And what about the apples? Then he thought about, and what about the apples? Then he realized, oh no, apples are all right. So he said, no, there is no problem with the apples. They fall off naturally when they are ripe. Why? Because apples, they fall off from the tree naturally. Nobody plucks them when they are ripe. Apples are all right if you let them fall off instead of tearing them from the tree plant. So there is no harm in eating the apples because apples are fine if they are allowed to fall down from the tree naturally and nobody plucks them from the tree branches, but not vegetables. So he said, no, but like vegetables, like we should not eat. Not a potato, for example. A potato will surely shrink. So would a carrot and an onion and a cabbage, we said, but no, vegetables will definitely cry. Why? Because they feel the pain, because they are plucked out. So, especially these vegetables. He heard the click of the front gate latch, and he jumped up and went out and saw the tall doctor coming down. He heard the click of the front gate latch, and he jumped up and went out, and he saw the tall doctor coming down the hatch, like little black bag in his hand. So when he arrived, now the doctor was there, holding a black bag where he must be carrying his essential, you can say, things and medicines which he needs to administer. case of an emergency. Basic medicines and his tools and his stethoscope must be there in the black bag. Well, the doctor said, well, what's all the trouble? So the doctor came and he said, yes, tell me, now what's the trouble? Why did you call me so early in the morning? Come with me, doctor. I want you to hear it. I called you because you are the only one I have to. It's over the road in the park. Will you come now? So he said, I want you to accompany me. If you're the only person who knows the details about my machine, you are the only person with whom I have shared the details of my experiment. So please accompany me to the park because I want you to hear something. The doctor looked at him. He seemed calmer now. So the doctor looked at him and Klausner seemed to be calm now. He was calmer than in comparison to what he was when he made the phone call to the doctor. There was no sign of madness or hysteria. He was merely disturbed and excited. He only appeared to be disturbed and excited at the moment, but he was not hysterical at that moment. And he was not behaving like a crazy person at that moment. They went across the road into the park, and Klausner led the way to the great beech tree, at the foot of which stood the long black coffin box and the axe. So the Klausner took the doctor to the same tree, right, which he hit with the axe, and he left that black box and the axe was left by him there only. So, why did you bring it out here? The doctor said. The doctor said, why have you brought this black coffin box here? I wanted a tree. There aren't any big trees in my garden. And why the axe? So Klausner said, I brought this box here because I wanted to test it upon a tree and there are no big trees in my garden. So then the doctor said, why the axe? Why have you brought this axe? You'll see in a moment. So Klausner said, in a moment you will come to know. But now, please put on these earphones and listen. But now, I want you to please put on these earphones and listen carefully. Listen carefully and tell me afterwards precisely. Precisely means very accurately, right? Tell me in detail what you hear. I want to make quite sure. Why? Because till now, I am the only person who has heard these strange sounds produced by plants and trees. So, I want you to hear it, and I want you to tell me precisely, very accurately what you heard and what was the sound like. The doctor smiled and took the earphones and put them over his ear. So the doctor fixed the earphones on his head. Klausner bent down and flicked the switch on the panel of the machine. Flick means to hit something, right? With a sudden movement. So he flicked the switch on the panel of the machine. Then he picked up the axe. So then he switched on the machine and then he lifted up the axe and took his stance. And then again he took his position with his legs apart, ready to swing. For a moment he paused. Can you hear anything? Then he was, after taking the position, ready to hit the tree. He paused for a moment and then he asked the doctor, can you hear anything? He said to the doctor. Can I wait? But the doctor was not able to hear what Klausner was saying because he had put on his earphones. So the voice was not very audible to him. So he said, can I hear what? Can I what? Can you hear anything? Just a humming voice. So then he again repeated. Klausner again repeated and the doctor said, just a humming sound. This is all I can hear. Klausner stood there with the axe in his hands, trying to bring himself to swing. But the thought of the noise that the tree would make made him pause again. So Klausner was standing there, ready to hit the tree. But again, that same sound, the sound which was produced by the tree earlier, it came to his mind. He was reminded of that sound. And so he paused. What are you waiting for? The doctor asked. The doctor asked, what are you waiting for? Why are you not hitting? Nothing, Klausner answered. So Klausner said, nothing, nothing. And then he lifted the axe and swung it at the tree. And as he swung, he thought he felt. He could swear he felt the movement of the ground on which he stood. He felt a slight shifting of the earth beneath his feet. And though the roots of the tree were moving underneath the soil, but it was too late to check the blow of the axe. And the axe blade struck the tree and wedged deep into the wood. Now what happened? The tree was about to fall because he could sense the movement of the roots under the soil. And the moment his axe struck the tree and wedged deep into the wood. At that moment, high overhead, there was the crackling sound of wood. Splintering. Splintering means shattering, right? Shattering and the swishing sound of the leaves brushing against other leaves. And they both looked up, and the doctor cried, "Watch out! Run, man! Quickly run!" So, at that moment, what happened? The doctor screamed, and because the tree was about to fall. So the doctor just looked up and he saw that the tree is coming upon them, and so he said, "Run, man, run!" Like he just screamed and shouted to Klausner to run. Watch out, Klausner, run, man, quickly run. The doctor had ripped off the earphone. Ripped off means he just took off the earphone, then was running away fast and was running very quickly. But Klausner stood spellbound, staring up at the great branch, 60 feet long at least, that was bending slowly downward. So, because the tree was a huge tree, so it was shattering down, right? So, he said he was just, but the Klausner, doctor started running to save his life, but Klausner was just standing there looking upward. He could see the great branch, 60 feet long at least, that was bending and slowly coming downward, breaking and crackling and splintering at its highest point. So the branches were breaking, crackling, and splintering, shattering at its highest point, where it joined the main trunk of the tree. The branch came crashing down, and Klausner leapt aside just in time. And just in time, Klausner was standing there and looking the tree coming down, the branches of the tree falling. And at the exact moment when it was just about to hit Klausner, what happened? He leapt aside, meaning he jumped aside just in time, means he had a very marginal escape. It fell upon the machine and smashed it into pieces. What happened? The tree fell upon the machine and the machine was broken into pieces. "Great heavens!" shouted the doctor as he came running back. "That was a near one. I thought it had got you." So the doctor said. The doctor came running back and then he said, "Oh, great heavens! I thought it was a near one. I thought you were gone. I thought it had got you. I thought it had got you means I thought that the tree is going to fall upon you. You had a marginal escape. You had a near escape." Klausner was staring at the tree, but Klausner was like spellbound standing there. He was just looking at the tree. His large head was leaning to one side, and upon his smooth white face there was a tense, horrified expression. And upon his face there was a tensed expression. A very horrified, a very terrified expression was there upon his face. Slowly he walked up to the tree and gently he prized the blade from the trunk. So slowly he went to the tree and removed the blade of the axe from the trunk of the tree. "Did you hear it?" he said, turning to the dog. His voice was barely audible. And so, in a very soft voice, very softly, he asked the dog, "Did you hear it?" The doctor was still out of breath from the running and the excitement. "Hear what?" So the doctor was still out of breath and breathing very fast. So he said, "Hear what?" "In the earphones. Did you hear anything when the axe struck?" So he said, "Did you hear anything when the axe struck the tree? In those earphones?" The doctor began to rub the back of his neck. The doctor just tried to recollect. "Well," he said, "as a matter of fact, to be very precise and to be very true," he paused and frowned a bit. He paused and frowned and bit his lower lip. So he just stopped, frowned, and started biting his lower lip. "No, I'm not sure. I couldn't be sure. I don't suppose I had the earphones on for more than a second after the axe struck." So he said, I can't say anything whether I heard or not, because I don't think that I had those earphones upon my head for a long time when the axe hit the tree. I immediately ripped them off. I immediately pulled them out. Yes, but what did you hear?" So Klausner was not interested in knowing when the earphones were removed from the head. So he said, yes, but tell me, what did you hear? What was the sound?" "I don't know," the doctor said. "I don't know what I heard. Probably the noise of the branch breaking." So the doctor said, I don't know. I really cannot recollect that I heard anything besides the sound of the branches breaking. He was speaking rapidly, rather irritated. So the doctor was like very irritated now. So the doctor was very irritated, right? Because he was just able to somehow save his life, and then this person wants to know what I heard and what I didn't hear. So that was something which was really irritating for the doctor. So we end here and then we'll move further in the next class. Thank you.